Welcome to the First Hebrew Primer, Chapter 26. For the vocabulary this week, one of the nice things is that a number of these words you already know, so we're just learning the meaning of them in the Hifil stem. And there are some new words as well. So as we look at the upper right-hand side, there is a root, kof vav nun. We'd pronounce that kun. So kun. Treat that vav like a shurik. It's a hollow verb. And in the Hifil stem, it means to prepare or establish. Then there's the verb, we're going to spend quite some time on this today, nakah, and that in the Hifil means to strike, hit, or smite. Then you already know this verb, bo, means to come in the Kal stem. In the Hifil stem, it means to bring, or to cause to come. Cause to come is a little bit of a roundabout way to translate that. We could just translate it bring. We already know this verb as well. From mut means to die in the Kal stem. In the Hifil, it means to kill, to cause to die. And this verb you know as well. Kum means to get up or arise. In the Hifil stem, it means to establish or to cause to arise. Looking in the upper left, you already know this verb as well. Shuv, which means to return in the Kal stem. In the Hifil, it means to bring back or to cause to return. Now there's some new nouns here. This one, kaf, is used for the palm of your hand or the sole of your foot. It's the same word, kaf. Then we have a preposition, neged, which means opposite or in front of. The noun afar, which is dust. The noun etzem, which means bone or essence, and that is feminine even though it looks masculine. Then we have pen, which means lest, conjunction there. And then the word pa'am, which means, literally this means a footstep, or an occurrence, or a time. I'll talk more about this in just a minute. It's used in some Hebrew idioms. And then finally the adjective kadosh, which means holy. Now I just mentioned that word pa'am, which can be translated a time. Like I said, its most literal meaning is a footstep. It can be translated once, often. And the plural, pa'amim, is used to express like times, like you'd say 3 times or 4 times. So here's a couple of examples of that. We have this first sentence, Pa'am hu asa lechem. So once, you could translate this simply as once. He made bread. Or here you have hu asa lechem shalosh pa'amim. He made bread shalosh pa'amim, 3 times. You could just translate that 3 times. So it's an idiomatic usage of that word. So we're going to be talking about the Hifil stem with hollow verbs. Hollow verbs, as you know, are verbs where the middle root letter is a yod or a vav. They're called hollow because in many forms that middle letter drops out. In fact, in Proto-Semitic, or these roots were originally just biconsonantal roots that we call hollow. There's a reason why that terminology has developed, but it's probably best to just think of them now as hollow roots where that middle root letter drops out. And in the Hifil pattern, or the Hifil stem, in many forms, that middle letter is going to drop out as well. In fact, in all tenses, the middle vav or yod will drop out. So the way to identify the root, if it's a Hifil verb, is to know the root well enough to recognize it, even when there's only 2 letters left. The hey prefix and the hirik yod kind of infix, or the hirik yod before the final root consonant, are characteristic of the Hifil pattern, and those are going to help you recognize these verbs as well. So let's just take a brief look at this paradigm here. Here's the word bo, and I have on the left-hand side a Kal imperfect, and you can see we've gone over this before. Tavo, tavo, or yavo, tavo, 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 tavoi. Now let's look at the Hifil. You'll notice the prefix vowel is the same. So that signal letter, the vowel under the signal letter, is a long A or a kametz in both cases. So the main difference here is the Kal has the holum, whereas the Hifil has that hirik yod, the I vowel followed by the yod, which is characteristic of the Hifil stem, all the way through the pattern. So that's really going to be the main way you can tell that this is a Hifil verb pattern. And then to get to the root, you have to drop that middle yod out and say, okay, I've got 2 root letters left, the beit and the aleph. What might that be? And this is where your vocabulary is going to really come in handy. Let's take a look at the perfect. The endings of the perfect are always going to be the same, right? The tatati, utem, tenu, that's the same in the hifil verb pattern as in the cow. But what about with these hollow roots? Well, you'll see in the cow, you have the long A under the first root consonant in every form, and then followed by the aleph before the signal letters that go on the end of the word. In the hifil pattern, you get the hey prefix with the long I vowel, or the tsere vowel there, instead of the short hirik that you'd normally see in the hifil stem. It's the long I, or that tsere vowel translated, or you pronounce that as an A. So hevi would be how you say this. And then before the final root consonant, you have a hirik yod, and then you have the endings of the perfect. So if you want to think about this, how do you know it's going to be a perfect conjugation or perfect tense? Well, you know because of the ending. The tatati, utem, tenu endings are there. How do you know it's a hifil? Well, you've got that hey prefix followed by an I vowel. This is a long I, the tsere, but hey prefix followed by an I vowel. And then, you know that. How do you know it's a hifil? Well, you have that hirik yod between, or right before that final root consonant. So then you're like, okay, well now what's the root? You have a bait and aleph left. And again, this is where your vocab will come in handy to be able to determine that. As you look at the command forms, in the cow stem, the command form is go or enter. In the hifil, you have a hey prefix followed by a long A, ha, ve. And then this is an I vowel before the final root consonant as well. Although it's not the hirik yod, you don't have the yod vowel letter there. It's just the tsere. So have means to bring, right? That's the hifil meaning of the verb bo in the imperative. And then here you have a 2FS imperative with that hirik yod ending. In the cal, it's boi versus havii. Again, that hirik yod ending tells you it's a 2FS. That ha is the prefix on the imperative or command form in the hifil verb pattern. And then that hirik yod is indicative of the hifil verb pattern in general. And we see that on the command form here as well. And then you have the third masculine plural and the third feminine plural. You can see those forms there. In the participle, on the right-hand side, we have the cow participle forms. And the endings are all the same, right? The participle form endings are the same endings as the noun. So you have no ending in the masculine singular, the kamete in the 3FS, or it could be a sigol tav, the hirik yod main in the masculine plural, and the holovav tav in the feminine plural. Like all of the derived stems, or these verb patterns that are not cal, everything but the cal is going to take a prefix on the participle. The nifil takes a nun prefix. Every other verb pattern takes a main prefix. So you see here the main prefix all the way through. And the I vowel, this long I, that tells you it's a hifil, along with that hirik yod before the final root consonant tells you it's a hifil participle. Now that long I vowel is going to get reduced to a shava. That's going to make the participle look a lot like the PL stem, which we've already taken a look at. So the way that you tell it's a hifil is look at that infix I vowel, that yod, hirik yod there. That's going to be indicative of the hifil stem all the way through. All right, let's take a look at the infinitive form. Just like is often the case, the 2MS imperative and the infinitives have a lot of overlap, a lot of similarity. Now, the little bit of a difference, if you look on the right-hand side here on the regular infinitive, is instead of a tsere under the bait, you have a hirik yod, which is this the regular infinitive there, or the infinitive construct. Normally we'll have a prepositional prefix on it. You can see that it in comparison with the cow stem. The infinitive of emphasis, or the infinitive absolute, you can see the difference between those two as well. The only difference between the regular infinitive and the infinitive of emphasis is the change in the vowel from the hirik yod to the tsere before the final root consonant. Okay, so how do you recognize a hollow verb pattern or a hollow verb in the hifil pattern when you see one? Here's just some rules of thumb. You need to know the roots well enough to recognize them without the middle letter. And your vocabulary is so key and is going to help you a lot. in this. You need to be able to recognize the hifil verb by the he preceding the root letters, or by the hirik yod before the final root letter, or both. A lot of forms will have both. In the imperfect, the hifil looks a lot like the cal imperfect. They're both going to have that long A vowel under the signal letter, so the main way you tell is that hirik yod before the final root consonant. Hifil hollow verbs have a main participle prefix, just like regular other hifil verbs. You'll notice the middle root letter drops out in all forms. And to find the root of a hifil hollow verb, remove all the signal letters, then add a yod or a vav between the two root letters that are left, and try to recognize a verbal root that you know. Or if you don't know, you can look it up in a lexicon. Now, there are some clipped forms with these hollow verbs in the hifil verb pattern, which we've seen before in many places. Let's take a look at the regular imperfect here of bo. This is yavi in the hifil verb pattern. If you do a reversing vav, imperfect, you'll notice that there's a shortening, that yod drops out, and the vowel there changes to a tsere. So it's vayave instead of yavi. And that's called a clipped form, or a shortened form of the verb that we often get with a reversing vav imperfect. Or you have yolid, that hirik yod in the imperfect will change to a segol, a much shorter I-class vowel. Or yotzi from yatsa is going to change to yotze, vayotze, to the tsere. So you can see those distinctions all the way through. Here you have an imperfect third he verb. We're going to talk more about this verb in just a minute. Yakeh, this is from naka, the verb naka. And that segol he at the end is going to be clipped or dropped off in a reversing vav imperfect to vayak. And that's from naka, third he verb. Many of these other ones are very similar to what we've already looked at there. So just pay attention to those clipped forms that you often see in the reversing vav imperfect. Okay, let's talk about the verb naka for a minute. It is highly irregular, and that's because it's a doubly weak verb. It's both a first noon, and the noons often drop out, as you know. And it's also a third he verb, and the final he often drops out, as you know as well. So I'm going to go through this particular root, and there are a number of verbs like this, so it's helpful to know a little bit about what some of the characteristics of this verb are. Now, the verb naka appears most often in the hifil verb pattern, which is why the textbook is covering it in this section. So here's the participle form from naka. Now take a look. We have the endings of the participle there, right? There's no ending in the masculine singular. In the feminine singular, this is just like a regular third he verb. That final he, segol he, has dropped off, and it's replaced by the feminine singular ending, the kametz he. Or in the masculine plural, that segol he drops off, and you put in the masculine plural ending, the hirik yod mem. The same thing with the feminine plural. So that's just like a regular third he verb. The other difference here, though, is it's also first noon, and so the noon is going to assimilate as a strong dagish, a dagish forte in that middle root consonant. That the noons are really shy, right? So if they can, they ball up and hide as a dagish forte, or that doubling forte, in the second root consonant. So that dot actually tells you that that it's a noon, a first noon verb. So this is makeh, is from the verb naka, again, which means to strike or smite. And you can see that all the way through the pattern here. The tough thing with this is there's only one root letter left, and so that makes it especially challenging. In the imperfect, you have a very similar thing. Very often, only one root letter will be left. So here's the first common singular. The noon has assimilated as that doubling dagish there, and we do have the segol he left, so we actually have two root consonants in this form. Akeh from naka, that's I will strike, or takeh. Here's taki, this is a 2fs form. You will strike, and the segol he drops out and is replaced by the signal letter ending of the imperfect 2fs. Here's the 3ms. Again, this is a 2ms or 3fs. The first common plural And so the noon here is actually not the noon of the root. This is the signal letter noon for the we will strike. And the noon of the root is hiding as that doubling dagesh there. And then we have the sigol hey ending. Here's a 2MP form, taku. Again, the noon has assimilated. That final hey has dropped out to put the signal letter in. And that's really the same thing that happens through this whole pattern. So again, in many of these forms, there's only one root letter left, just the kaf. It's the first noon, third hey verb. The imperative forms in the hifil stem look a little unusual as well. It's got the hey prefix of the hifil, followed by the kaf. There's no ending, and the noon has dropped out as well. So hak is actually means to strike or smite. That's a 2ms imperative from naka. So it's just a highly irregular form, something to pay attention to and recognize. It is a fairly common verb, especially in the hifil stem. Here we have haku. This is the masculine plural imperative from naka. And then you have a feminine singular imperative there as well. For the infinitives, the regular infinitive, just like all third hey verbs, end in a holem vav tav. And then you have the hey prefix. The noon again has assimilated, so it's hakot, means to strike or smite. Very often you see it with the lamed prepositional prefix, lahakot. And then the infinitive of emphasis looks like hake. That seirei hey looks just like any third hey verb in the infinitive of emphasis. Again, just the first noon has assimilated. There is a noun, naka. And like many other participles that you've learned in this point, the participle naka has become grammaticalized as a noun in its own right because it was a really common function of it. And so in many lexicons or dictionaries that you look at now, the meaning of maka as a noun is like a hard blow, a hit, or a plague. In fact, it's the most common word there for plague. So that is it for this week. It is tough. These weak verbs are difficult. Be patient with yourself. You'll be able to get this. And just one last time I want to reiterate, vocabulary is like your best friend here. It will really help you be able to master these forms.